CEE Brown in your face.
Have you heard of Everything at Once?
Do you know about Everything at Once?
It's internationally known.
Aliens listen to it.
It's the best ever.
If there's something you're looking for in the 814, or feeling a little bored and think there ain't no more, check out Everything at Once and allow it to be your source. It's that raw podcast that's always showing support, highlighting the scene. No need to take I-90 to Peep or 79 to see how it be. Interviewing your locals with mindsets that are global. Innovators and creators on every single upload. So much going on in the EPA.
Incredible content.
Everything at Once will keep you up to date.
Amazing guests.
What you doing? Come through and hang with Tony and Dave.
Community driven.
Bringing everything at once from around the way. Everything at once from around the way. Hey.
Please listen. We love you. Everything at Once.
Everything at Once.
It's time to introduce this show.
The best show on the face of the planet.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in today. We want to thank our Patreon producers, Brian G., Josh W., Ian D., Nick G., and Sadie M.
Patreon, it's an awesome way to support the show and say thanks. You can become a Patreon supporter by clicking the link below and choosing to be an intern, assistant, or producer level supporter.
If being on the production team is too much pressure for you, you can also send any contributions using our Venmo at Everything at Once Studios. We now want to thank all the local businesses who supported this episode. These businesses get the Everything at Once stamp of approval and are critical members of the Everything at Once community. We couldn't do it without them. We've all seen those cars covered in rust, rotting out the floorboards and shortening their lifespans. Don't let your car be a victim of the harsh Erie winters this year by getting a fluid film undercoating at Tommy's Automotive.
Winter is coming. Book your appointment today. Fluid film undercoating with Tommy's Automotive starts at $100. God, that's so cheap.
It really is a great deal.
It's a slamming deal. So you're going to want to call Tommy to get your quote right now at 814-384-8088.
With winter approaching, are there any last-minute details that you want to change or renovate around your home?
I might, but you know who to call.
Yeah! Ghostbusters!
No, Tony. No, not Ghostbusters. Solid State Construction.
Oh, yeah. Solid State.
Yeah.
Duh. Solid State takes pride in all their home remodeling projects. Solid State specializes in bathroom remodeling, kitchen renovation, window and door installation, custom design work, and more, including painting, flooring, drywall, sidewalk, decks. Get your free quote today by calling Nick at 814-397-7854. Solid people, solid product, Solid State Construction.
You know, Tony, with all these renovations from Solid State, I think we might have kicked up some bad energy around here. Yeah, oh yeah. Luckily, we know just the people to go see.
I know it this time. It's Ghostbusters.
No, Tony! Our friends at Cauldron and Thorne.
Wow, I feel really dumb right now, and I can't believe I didn't think of Cauldron and Thorne. The world's largest witchcraft and metaphysical shop, with everything a person needs to channel the spirit world.
Practice some self-care.
Find enlightenment.
Curse your enemies.
Protect yourself from your enemies.
Bless your friends.
Cleanse your space from negative energies. You can check out all the magical wares available for these different practices we all love and enjoy at Cauldron and Thorne, 2724 West 8th Street, or online at cauldronandthorne.com.
This week, we have an incredible guest for you.
Titus, Councilperson-elect for Erie City.
They are just very passionate about the politics and the people and the trajectory of our city becoming an equitable place for every Erieite.
A lot of people may not know this, but Tyler comes from a social working background, which is a really surprisingly good fit for the kind of person that I want on our city council.
We had a great conversation. We learned a lot, and they are someone who is definitely committed to a vision that is going to make Erie a better place.
And now, without further ado,
Tyler Titus.
Councilperson-elect, Tyler Titus.
Yes.
We are incredibly happy to have you here in the studio today, and I've been doing a ton of research leading up to this because you have so many interesting things going on right now in your world, and your whole background and where you come from. It's all a very interesting story to me.
Sometimes I hear people like ask me about things. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. That thing did happen.
That's cool. You got your hands in so many pots. You get mixed up, or not mixed up, but
No,
just
I do get them mixed up.
you get them mixed up. Yeah,
You were correct there.
it's good to be busy.
It is. It is. I have made my wife many promises about, we will eventually slow down. I will eventually slow down.
I know what that's like. I feel like I've been working on this show so much lately.
Did you just keep going and going and
Just
going
keep
and
going and going. Oh my gosh. It's like sometime eventually it's going to break. I'm going to have a break. Like next month won't be so bad, right?
That's what I say every month. I'm like, oh yeah, it's gonna really slow down next month.
We're gonna calm down.
And there's
Oh my
another
gosh.
thing.
More things always. So you just got back from a cool trip to Harvard.
I did. Yeah, I got to spend about 3.5 weeks at Harvard doing their state and local senior executive program. And are you allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go
Well,
for
it
it.
like kicks your ass. It makes you feel really stupid, and then it makes you feel really smart at the end.
Nice.
So it's like it was definitely a boot camp of sorts. But
That always makes it feel better in the end when you've worked hard and you've struggled and went through, difficult situations in order to grow.
Absolutely. And if I'm going to be in something, I'm going to go all in. And so I went all in, and I made sure that, I was doing the readings and doing the hard asks, and there was a lot of readings. And if you didn't do them, they shamed you in front of the whole class. So
Ooh.
you stayed up to do your readings.
That reminds
That's
me of
embarrassing.
like Legally Blonde.
Yes. It's Harvard classes were everything that they portray them to be in the movies.
That's so
absolutely
funny.
were.
Wow. So your professors were pretty serious. They were not holding back.
No, not at all. I mean, and the one professor that we had taken a red-eye flight because they had been on CNN just a few hours before
Jeez.
class, dialoguing about are we going to head into a war? Like, what's this? And then they come into class, and you're like, I can't believe I'm sitting with this person right now, and they're teaching me, and it was pretty mind-blowing.
So what was like the focal point of the class? What are you taking away from it?
It is the genuine commitment to your why. Is it about you, or is it about this cause that you're committed to, and what are you willing to sacrifice and put into that cause that has absolutely nothing to do with you? And if you're not willing to, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But then maybe you're not the one who should be leading the fight or be the one in the front. And so it really makes you reflect on, where is my priority? And am I committed to the things that I have protested to be committed to? And am I willing to do the work that I need to do to get the thing done?
Great. So being a council person is definitely not an easy job.
No, it is not. And most people actually don't like you.
Yeah.
So.
And running for council is not an easy job either. I mean, we've had a few different people. We've had Susanna, we've had Rock, and all of them have really put themselves through the ringer in order to get into the positions that they're approaching,
It is. It is a commitment not just for the candidate, but everyone that is in that
Whole
candidate's
family.
life. Right?
Yeah.
It is. It requires them to put a lot of things on pause for you.
So, go ahead.
No, the politicians aren't, historically the most favorable people to the general public.
There's a lot of thoughts and opinions, and I think that is because we've had a lot of unfavorable people hold office, right? We've had a lot of people where this was about them, it was about what they could get, and kind of stayed in a small niche of people. And so we have corroded the trust in local, state, and federal politicians, and those of us who are coming at it from a genuine desire to create change are now having to carry the baggage of the bad people, so to speak, or the corrupt people.
And it seems like our city council is kind of going through its own progressive awakening. It seems like there's like a solid band of city council people right now. I've been calling them like a little mini our Bernie Sanders of Erie, the city of Erie Council, because there's a lot of really cool progressive ideas that are being thrown around right now, and interesting things that I didn't really know or believe were possible on a local or city level.
I don't think that we've ever fully, as a city or as a county, recognized how much power sits within our councils. Both city and county council is really where there's a lot that happens, because they essentially control the budget, where money gets invested and where it gets divested. And money is unfortunately everything
Right.
when it comes to creating a lot of change, especially what programs you're going to fund, where you're going to build, and what that looks like. So I agree. There's a lot of, I think, exciting things that are possible, and things that are being brought forward that I don't think we have seen before.
Yeah.
And that gives me hope.
Yeah, there's a lot of really creative and interesting ideas, and a lot of good things going on already. You know, it feels like we're on a good trajectory as a city and as a county to move ourselves into the future. So what are some of the things that you are looking to accomplish once you take your seat in January on the council?
So given my background in human services, there's an undeniable need for investment in safe and sustainable housing. I think we as a city have really tackled blight, but in that process, we haven't rebuilt a lot of the houses that we've kind of taken down. And we're seeing that effect now. If you've tried to rent in the past, year and a half, the prices are through the roof. We're seeing a lot of people who don't live in Erie because the properties were so cheap kind of gobble them up and
Right.
jack up the prices. A lot of slumlords are kind of coming through, and we're watching just families kind of get pushed out of neighborhoods where they've grown up because they can no longer afford the properties in this area. It's almost impossible to get loans for housing because of the interest rate, and the minute they hit the market, they're off the market. And so we're really in a crisis, and I don't think it's going to change until we really focus and commit to tenant rights and making sure that we're building and not just tearing down.
Right. That was something that Susanna was talking about, that currently Erie does not have any tenant rights, so to speak.
Correct.
And the city council currently is working on passing some bills to make sure that there are protections available to the people that are renting, so they're not being taken advantage of. I feel like this happens probably so much more than I may realize personally in my life, but it's really easy to take advantage of people from a position of power. And the little people, or the renters, or any situation where there's a uneven power dynamic, the little people really need that protection, because they're really at the will of those that are in power.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, it's expensive to be poor.
Oh, yeah.
Right? There's a lot more taxing that happens to you if you don't have the ability to pay for it outright or in cash, which most people, especially now, don't. Then you're either taking out a loan or it's going on a credit card, so you're paying triple over the time. And people who have the capital or the resources to just buy it outright don't have to face the same fees or jump through the same hoops. And so poor people are often hit with bigger fines, and it just compounds very quick.
Right.
And there isn't any recourse.
Right. There's an old anecdotal story from one of my favorite writers about a construction worker who has to buy a boot, and instead of buying the $150 boot that will last him 10 years, he's stuck buying the $20 boot every year, which is kind of like the story of being, the difficulties of being poor.
Absolutely.
Instead of short term you're saving money, but long term you're paying, almost double or triple what you would pay if you just had that initial startup capital.
It's also, when you're working yourself up, trying to better yourself, you have the programs in place that help people that are lower income. But once you crash your certain thresholds, then you're not eligible for those programs anymore. And you're almost making less money, or being able to support yourself even less when you're in that middle ground between poverty level and maybe middle class, if that exists anymore.
Yeah, that working class families pay the biggest burden, right? Because they're paying into the systems and they're paying into the services, but they can't access them. And oftentimes when you sit down and you look at it, it's by $1,000. That's nothing. That's maybe a month and a half of groceries now with prices.
Right.
And so to know that people are being denied critical sources or resources over these small gaps, it's gut wrenching. It's gut wrenching to watch, and it doesn't really motivate people either to
advance
to keep
themselves,
pushing,
yeah.
right? Because you're gonna carry the heavier burden.
Exactly. And outside of all, like these financial, like there's a lot of things that lead into these kinds of financial problems too. And as a social worker, I'm sure that you carry a interesting perspective as far as, you know, what goes into, because there's a lot more to this than just making housing available.
Yes.
There is an intense need for job skills around here. There's intense need for like life management skills around here. You know, a lot of people aren't afforded these opportunities or have these opportunities to learn how to balance a budget or make a schedule or work time, you know, practice time management skills, and are just left to, you know, here you go.
Right. And when you look at Pennsylvania, you can even just starting at the public education system and the way that we're funded, right? We've been ranked nationally as one of the worst states who've devised an educational funding system. And so, yes, things have shifted, and Governor Wolf put some things into place, and Governor Shapiro's, you know, advancing some of those things, but we're talking decades of being behind. So when we got boosts through, you know, our state reps and our senator had got us, you know, 14 million, that didn't catch us up. And then COVID happened, and you had people who were pulling out, and then, you know, so all of these things compound, and they're now just trying to get students to come back. And we're not talking about, you know, the traumas that have happened during the pandemic, the traumas that were happening before the pandemic, and now we're just expecting them to know how to balance their budget when they have gone through exponential amount of crises, and their families have gone through crises, and people are in survival mode.
Yeah, there is no budget. It's do what we can to get what
today.
we can
We
to
have
survive.
to make sure we get through today.
And a lot of that is generational.
Absolutely.
You know, so when it's generational, you don't have your predecessors, your family being able to give you clear answers on how to escape the cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like I could, if in that type of generational situation, I can't just ask my dad how to do stuff, or my mom, or whoever it is that's in my family that takes care of that kind of those kind of things.
And when you think about it too, like how many of us, if have the access to resources through everything. We can talk about advantage and privileges later, but if we had, you know, we needed $20 for gas, or if our car broke down, or if we even have a car and we were having like something happen, do we have somebody in our network that could help us, like either financially or give us a ride? And the reality is most people don't. And so every one of life events that happen, it just adds and it compounds on there. And so that's where, you know, when you were talking about it's not just the housing thing, you're absolutely correct, right? We've got jobs that aren't paying livable wages. We don't have a pedestrian-friendly city. Our busing system is, you know, it's doing the best that it can, but it takes like 2.5 hours to get to jobs. And so we have people who are having to pay longer for child care services because it takes that long to get to their job, that they're having to work 2 or 3 jobs. And it's not just housing. There's so many things that are compounding on that. But when we look to city council, what can city council kind of help to do? And there's lots of things we can, but housing is one of those things that we should be helping. We should be investing more in looking at child care and public transportation and those things.
That's good. So Erie is, I remember them talking about being like wanting to be a blue city, or a walkable city, or a green city. I can't remember what color they wanted to call it, but it was about being more physically active and exercising and using bikes as transportation and walking or running or traveling around, and supporting that movement. Because Erie, we're not like a big city, you know what I mean? It's not an incredibly long distance to travel from one end to the other, even on a bike. Walking may be another story, but on a bike or on transport, that shouldn't be 2.5 hours to get from one area to another.
Yeah, I have some individuals that I'm working with at the private practice or through our nonprofit who are in Wesleyville, and they have a job over on West Ridge. They have to leave their house 3 hours before their shift starts in order to make the buses work, or else they pay for like a $25 Uber.
Right.
Which, when you're only making $11, $12 an hour, that adds up fast. That's $50 just for one work shift.
Right. Yeah, because the lines don't, I mean, they connect, but it's always just a long waiting time, especially when you're trying to get out to West Ridge Road. There's only so many buses that go out there.
Yeah. And we're not even talking about what's going on in Corey or Union City or like Northeast. Like, it's almost impossible.
There's like very limited service providers out in those areas as well. So getting somebody the help that they need for mental health or whatever the issue may be is extremely difficult, especially if you're, getting out of jail.
Yeah.
And you live in Union City and you have to go see your probation officer twice a week, who's all the way in Erie, who's an hour away, and you have to make that trip and you have to make it there on time or else you're going to jail.
And in addition to that, then they're typically having to do things like drop urines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those are randomized. So you might get called 3 times a week, but you don't know until that morning. So if you just came out and you, from being incarcerated, not only are you charged with trying to find a job, which good luck with a criminal record, you now are probably going to have to drop urines, which you have no idea how many days of the week that those are going to be, and then having to come up here to meet whoever your case manager or probation officer is. Just thinking about how much that adds up and the stress that then puts on the families or those who are helping you, and how that will take up their time and their budget. Mm-hmm. And we can see why it's not just housing, but it's all these things compound, and it just adds up, and it's complex. It is complex.
It's like impossible. It's, string all that together in one day, like you got to drop a urine, you got to see your case manager. You might have to work that day too. With how the public transportation runs, you run into a situation where it's just like not physically possible to be in all the places at once.
Exactly.
Or financially possible. And the thing about it is that poverty is such a family thing. You know what I mean? It affects, because we have that the person who comes out of jail, freshly out of incarceration, on probation. Now they need support from wife, from mom, from dad, from girlfriend, from boyfriend, from whoever it is that's in their life to, help them get transportation, help them get back and forth, help them pay the bills, give them a safe place to live until they're able to find one on their own. And that whole detriment is just a drag on the whole family unit. The whole social unit that's around them at that time.
And it's so much stigma. Go ahead.
Right. No, well, I was going to say, and especially here, like that's such a tall order for all of you to have to tackle, because it's not like it's just poverty here. It's like very high poverty compared to the rest of the state, the rest of the country, extremely bad poverty numbers for black families, for my minority population. What was it? The poorest zip code a couple years ago, the 16501. So it's not like it's just there's poverty here. We got to figure out a way to take care of it and make things better. It's like we're in the absolute like worst possible spot.
Yeah.
In comparison to other cities of similar size.
When you've got 44% of your children, living in poverty, we've got a big issue on our hand. We've got a very big issue on our hand.
Yeah, it's huge. And you come from a mental health background, so you've seen a lot of this.
Yes.
You came up through OCY early in your career.
Yes. Yeah.
So I can only imagine seeing those kinds of things that you've seen in those situations. It must be heartbreaking.
It's amazing for me how the transformation in my perception has really happened. Growing up in poverty myself, with 2 family members, like my mom and my stepdad, trying really hard. My mom putting herself back through school to become an LPN. My stepdad having dropped out of high school in 10th grade to go into logging with his father. And then you develop a perception, and then they became foster parents. And so then I shifted and I started to see things a little bit differently. And then I started as a case aide for Venango County, but then came up to Erie County and started. And you have these views, and you start to get like jaded, right? You start to get angry, and you're like, why can't they just leave this abusive person, or why are they still making these choices? But then as you start to really dive in, you see how much of the system is actually designed to keep people kind of stuck in certain places. And because of all the things that we've just talked about, it becomes almost impossible sometimes to leave a domestically violent situation, because where are you going to go? How are you going to pay for it? Right. And you start to develop this nuanced understanding of how then we create solutions that are sometimes causing more harm to the people who are engaging and with those resources. And OCY, it's one of those where sometimes you're stuck between a rock and a hard place of you want to help, you have to help, and the laws are written in certain ways that you can only do so much to help unless it's, reaches this threshold of abuse and neglect. And it's another one of those systems that looked really great on paper, but that as it implemented, you started to see the systemic racism that was rampant throughout it, especially for Black and Indigenous families. We started to see that, overrepresented, meaning that there were more Black and Indigenous children who were in the various settings. And then we started to see that youth who identified as queer, at some point it was like 40% identified as queer if they were in aggregate care settings or were out living on the streets. So it's just these systems we come up with and we designed are often created by people who weren't doing the groundwork to begin with, right? Mm-hmm. And they look really great on paper and we think it's a really great idea, but when we don't involve the people who've kind of worked in the field or had these lived experiences, we suddenly get policies and budgets and programs that cause more harm than good.
Right. It's really easy to look from the outside and see these kinds of issues and identify them and be like, oh, here's your issue, just do this. And a lot of times that I feel like from a person that's not familiar with this situation, they don't understand all the nuance that's involved in accomplishing these goals and these tasks that they have to do, whether they're part of probation, part of OCY, part of whatever system or organization that they're a part of. And without that personal experience or seeing it up close, it is very difficult for a lot of people maybe to identify that there is a lot more going on than what meets the eye.
Yeah.
They aren't not, like there's a disconnect between this whole situation where they're not observing all of those other things that we just talked about here on this show, and people just see it as like, hey, this person's being lazy, this is what they want, they're a bad person, they're this, they're that, and throwing all these labels onto them instead of actually like recognizing that they're a person and they're struggling, and there's a lot more to this struggle going on than them just not showing up to their appointment or whatever it is that they are trying to accomplish, whatever their goal is as part of their treatment plan.
Absolutely.
It's got to be a real boon for you, like having that kind of background. It seems like that a lot of what you're saying is very transferable to being a city council person. Like,
I think so.
Yeah,
right.
like you want to, you got like, because you got your campaign, you got what you're telling people you want to accomplish. And you truly want to do it, but you still have to work within the red tape, within the law, within working with other people on the council to get things changed. It's not like you can, as much as you want to do it, it's not like you can just go in and just do everything that you want to do because it's going to make things better in your heart. You still have to work around all that is the law.
Right, absolutely. And right, so on council, you're one of 7. And so part of being able to accomplish this is making sure you always can convince 3 other people to vote along with your ideas. And I think that sometimes we, as candidates or as electeds, forget that element of it. And we'll do things to isolate ourselves or, and we have to expose truths and whatever. But we also then have to remember we've now got to get those people to work with us. And it's always a dance around it. And one of the quotes that kind of like plays over in my mind is, you have to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb. And I think sometimes that happens too is when we're out is, we have all these ideas and we come running with them and then we get there and it feels so slow and it can make people so angry. Like, you promised these things. And it's not that you give up on those things, but sometimes it's a lot more convincing the other people to like, this is a good idea. And I think it also that can corrode some trust in people as well too, though.
I think that it kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier when you were at Harvard and that sense of delayed gratification and the hard work and the reward at the end. So just like many other things that are huge accomplishments in my life, and I'm sure in your guys' life as well, there's a sense of delayed gratification, and you got to keep grinding to eventually reach that goal, because especially in government, in social services and everything, things move very, very, very slowly.
Yes.
Nothing happens overnight, and progress is made very carefully over a long period of time, and there's many steps forward and many steps backwards, and hopefully you net a positive goal. So right now, with the way the council sits, it seems like finding your way through that opposition is, you know, a very delicate thing that you're working on.
Yes.
And that you have some people on your side, and there are other like-minded individuals that are working with the same goals. So how do you guys must talk a lot?
And so even I've already started, right, forming some of those relationships, because it's imperative too. Like when you go to run for office, thinking about who's there, how you're going to represent, what you're going to be able to accomplish, and what you promise as you run. And those relationships really are key. And most of the people that are even on city council right now, I don't think any of them are bad people. I think all of them, they came with a purpose and they came with a mission, and all of them have shown that they're willing to sit down and talk. Like they might not agree on personal opinions or beliefs, but that doesn't matter. If you're able to show, like, here's all the reasons why this is effective or why this would why this would make a difference, they've all shown that they're willing to do that work with you. It's part of the reason, again, going back to where I do have hope. I do see a city council right now that is really trying, that is really listening to one another. They're not up there to just come at each other, but they want to get things done, and they're doing the things. Most of the votes have been unanimous, which is unheard of. Because there's so much difference in just the opinions and even the political backgrounds from everybody sitting there. But they've worked through these issues in such a way that everyone feels confident with the end result they're getting ready to vote on, which I think shows a lot.
Yeah, it's very incredible, especially unanimous that nobody's opposed. It's good. Do you feel like you need that opposing voice though sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. So I always joke. I think that you need to have the people who can sit around the table and have calm, long, maybe multiple drawn out conversations, but you also need the people who are just going to drop the truth bombs, right? And they're just going to say, no, this is why this is. And sometimes dissenting from the rest of the group is necessary, right? You're also elected to represent people and not just yourself. And so if you are the people you are representing have a certain view, or if you have to make sure you're verbalizing that, because that's literally what you were elected to do. And I think it's important, staying true to your values, staying true to your morals, but staying true to the people and your constituents. Sometimes I think you will vote against maybe the loudest opinions of those who are your constituents, because you can see the more nuanced perspective and you see the bigger picture. But then it's your job to try to convey that bigger picture as well too.
Right. And one of my favorite sayings is, honesty without compassion is brutality.
Yeah.
And I think in these types of situation, it would probably work in your favor to practice that saying, and along with the other council members, because yes, it's important to drop bombs of truth and stuff, but it's probably also important to do that in a way that is delicate and kind and compassionate, so that way you're not building animosity with your group.
Absolutely, right. And another one that I kind of lean into quite a bit is clarity is kindness. And if you are kind of all over the place and you're not really sure what's kind of where your stance is on something, I think that's unkind. And when you can hold effective, sometimes brief conversation and like, these are my points and this is why, it creates that sense of clarity and it allows somebody to kind of see where you're standing. And I think that is important and often missed in politics.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that a lot of times more words makes, just like you said, more words makes it a little bit more confusing.
Which I think is done by design sometimes.
Many times, especially in politics.
Yes.
It's going to be a tough line to hold with how continuously more agitated the general population seems to get day by day. There's not a whole lot of compassion. There is, but there's a whole vacuum of compassion out in the world and in this city in general.
And I get that a lot. So there's when I'm chatting with people, they're like, how are people treating you out on the doors? Like, what is it like when you're out knocking? And I would say 90% of the doors that I knock on, it's met with a genuine desire to just be heard, right? And they're angry, but it's a justified anger. And so many of them are feeling, I believed in this person, or I believed in this mission, and I feel forgotten again. I feel like that I was betrayed. And so just wanting their lived experience to be heard and to know that somebody sees them and hears them and is going to do something about it, that there is a lot of opposition and there are some very angry people, but that's not the average voter. That's not the average person in the community.
Right. Do you think that a lot of people in Erie stay up on the local politics?
No, I don't. I don't think the average community member is really aware of a lot of things that are happening. But I also think that many of the systems and the offices have not been very transparent. Mm-hmm. So I don't blame community members for not knowing everything. I don't want to create a sense of or permission to not be actively involved, right, and to come into this complacency. But I also want to hold those who are in leadership positions to be more transparent.
Right. So a long time ago, on a different podcast with a different co-host, we were thinking about doing a show about one of the upcoming elections, and we were both doing research, and we were trying to find all the stuff about the different political candidates, what the offices were, what their points were, what their platform was all about, and we were going to discuss the different platforms on the show and kind of make an episode out of it. So we spent the day trying to research, and we had the hardest time finding anything about anyone local as far as politics were concerned. And that was really, really disappointing to me, which is part of why I think it's important for me now to bring people like yourself and the other council people that we've had on the show onto the show, so people can get an idea of who they are actually voting for, and hopefully build up some motivation to go out there and vote in our local election.
Absolutely. And I think historically local elections have been run that way, right? It's word of mouth, and who can kind of create the biggest name following. I'm not naive that Tyler Titus is that name. It has great alliteration. It's easy to remember. Sure. It's worked for me. And you know, the fact that I've been pretty consistently on the ballot, people are remembering and recognizing my name. But we've also, as candidates, I think, become very complacent in how we go out and navigate, and we often rely on the way it's always been done. And I think the city council race, where I was the top vote getter, and beating out some of the names that are also well recognized, is speaking to this desire of people wanting something different, right? I think we're starting to see younger voters come out. We're starting to see more activism happening, and not just like Facebook wars. Like we're starting to see more protests. We're starting to see more, people get registered. And so I think that there's a hunger here, and we as candidates really have to rise up to that and meet that need, because there's a want for something different.
Right. And I think on the local level, I feel like on the national level, so many people are turned off because it seems like you're really stuck between, to go off South Park, a giant douche and a turd sandwich. You know what I mean? You don't really have anybody that represents you. They both suck. And they're both owned by, whatever corporation or super PAC or party they belong to. Whereas here on the local level, we have a lot more opportunities to find individuals that we support and can get behind and, really make a difference on that smaller stage that lead us up to hopefully getting some candidates on a national level that aren't a giant douche and a turd sandwich.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we look at how it's kind of been set up, right, there's disenfranchisement and privilege that comes into people not being involved in local politics, right? We intentionally pushed community members out on purpose, right? Because we know where their votes are going to go. So we've made them feel like their voice doesn't matter and that we don't want them to show up. And then there's a whole other group that's very apathetic because, well, nothing's really going wrong for them. So why would I change it, right? And so we bank on those two things happening. We bank on people staying disenfranchised and apathetic, because the group that's involved, we know the formulas on how to reach them. We know who they are. We know what shows up. We know what talk points they like. And so as we start to get younger people more involved, you can see this disenfranchised group coming back in, and it's making it harder for the people who've always relied on these certain algorithms or these certain, formulas to be like, well, shit, what did these guys want to, because we haven't been paying attention over here. And the louder we get and the more we engage in the local, the more it changes the state and the federal.
Right.
And I think people find local politics uninteresting. Oh, it's boring. Like, who cares about school board? We learned in the pandemic, everyone should care about the school board, right? We see very quickly with the book bannings how powerful school boards are. Who cares about city council? It's just a bunch of typically, no offense, old white dudes. Like, what do they know about what's going on for me? But again, during the pandemic, when we saw businesses closing, we saw funding then being distributed, it mattered a lot who was sitting on there, because now they're deciding who gets the money and who gets to stay open and how they're going to help them. And so if we can activate and be like, this affects where we get to work, where we get to live. If we freaking get the internet where we live,
right,
that's local. That's all local. What our schools look like, what our policing system, what our fire departments, what our emergency response teams look like, all local. And that will have effect day to day, where state, it takes a minute before we feel what happens. And it takes a really long time for the federal to feel it there. But when we start to stack things in an unfavorable way or in a very extremist kind of way, we see the ripple effect all the way up to what we see with the Supreme Court happening, right? So when we don't pay attention to local and then we don't pay attention to judicial races, we're now living in the hell that is created with that.
Right.
I think that, definitely for worse, it's not for better. But usually when I get to talking to people about politics on the local level even, the only thing people, not everybody, but a lot of people seem to not really care as long as they're not like paying more in taxes.
Yeah.
That's the only thing they care about. Right. These programs, they come and go, whatever, let people do what they want. Oh, I'm going to pay a little bit more money. We need to put a stop to this. That just seems to be like a theme that every time I get into talk, I don't talk politics much, but that seems to be the only thing people get really truly riled up about, is if they have to start paying more in taxes. And that's unfortunate, because there's so many other things that need to be taken care of.
Absolutely. And so many of those things are going to cause their taxes to raise, right? When we are housing more people in our prison systems, right? When we are having to put out more and help those who are struggling with addiction or mental health, it's because we didn't address those other things. And so now, yes, our taxes are going to go up, because now there's more people pulling from those services. Mm-hmm. So if we want our taxes to go down, we need to get more people to stay in Erie and live in Erie so that is distributed. But we also need to take care of it so we have more people paying into it, so it's not just following on a certain group of people to do it.
Right. So the population in Erie has been falling steadily for the past few years, to my knowledge. What can we do? How do we make Erie an attractive place again? I know that we have we're working on becoming a sanctuary city for the LGBTQ people that are fleeing persecution from numerous different states around. Especially Florida and Texas, all those
Tennessee,
places.
Kentucky, everywhere. Yeah.
They're what does being a sanctuary city actually mean, though? Do we get to put it on a banner? Does it get sent to these individuals through some sort of network? What makes it beneficial for us to have this title as a sanctuary city for the LGBTQ plus community, other than getting a bunch of people that are notoriously known for going into blighted and impoverished areas and making those neighborhoods highly desirable to live in again? Absolutely.
So this is, for me, it's kind of double-edged, right? So I think that it sends a positive message that this is how we want to be seen. We want, as Erie City, to be seen as a place where all are welcome. And that if you are in a city or in a city or a state that is where you're being persecuted for being queer, that you can come here, and we're committing to it being a low priority to extradite you if the crimes were only regarding you being queer. That's the big. So
I had no idea about that whole aspect there. That was part of being a sanctuary. I mean, that makes sense when you say it out loud, but I had no idea that was even a part of it.
That's really the whole crux of it, to be honest, is it's very specific on, we're just asking our Erie State Police to not make it a priority if we receive a request to extradite people who were fleeing persecution. I think it sends a very loud message to not just the Commonwealth, but also the nation, that we as a city are doing this, we're stepping in this direction, and we are, as a council, signing on to this with only one dissenting vote. And I think that sends a loud message. So it's more about signaling where we want to go and where our beliefs are, versus really having a ton of power behind it. But sometimes the signal and the message has a lot of power.
That's how you get Batman to show up.
Absolutely, right? You got to put the light out there first before people even know that this is a thing that's happening. But to go back to your other question too, is how do we get people to stay here, right? It's things like this, but it's also, are we investing in the infrastructure to create a job force where industry is going to want to move here, or they're going to want to build up? Or do we have the platform for small businesses to succeed? So let's look at the businesses that we have right now. Are they growing? At what rate are they growing? Are they able to pull more people in? Are they able to take care of their current employees? Do their employees live in this city, or where do they have to go? Are they commuting? When we look at, what access do they have to public education? Because that matters. That matters to a lot of people. If I'm looking to move somewhere, the first thing as a parent I'm checking out is their public education system. And do we have options for this, once the child makes it through the education system, to then go on to find a life-sustaining job and to get access to affordable, safe housing? All those things matter and are why people come to stay. Mm-hmm. And when you kind of take a look around, we've invested in certain pockets of the city, but there's still very large sections of the city that we've not put our money where our mouth is. We use their data. We use their plight. We use their plight to get federal money, but we don't return it to the very communities who then we've already shown are most in need. We've done a very bad job as a city and county really reinvesting in the people that got us the money in the first place.
Right. Interesting. So what can we do to incentivize this or give money back to the community?
Donate to my campaign. No, I think it's really getting people on there who in our elected offices who have that lived experience of, I know what this policy is going to do, or I know what this policy isn't going to do. It's making sure that we are taking care of our local businesses, our small businesses, and encouraging other businesses to build, that we are, quote unquote, setting the stage that if we are going to attract or try to draw in other entities, that it's going to be good for the community in a long term. And there was a huge fuss over, we couldn't get Amazon. I do not want Amazon to come here. Like, they are a notoriously horrid employer.
Right.
And that would kill the mom and pop shops in our county. Like that, I was so glad that we were not ready for that. But we've got to make sure we're our medical field investments. What are we even looking and talking about what AI is going to do for things like the insurance industry? Erie Insurance is one of our top employers. And there's already discussions within, the health, life, and auto that so much of this is going to become automated. What does that mean for all this investment that just happened? So we got to think bigger. And I think places like, Gannon, or where we've started to really mobilize around tech, they're on the right track. But we've got to think not just in this crisis response, but like when we look 10 years down the line, our world is going to be completely different. We don't even know what AI is going to do. We really don't have a full understanding.
Right. One of the most interesting things that I've been thinking about lately as far as AI goes is that when we all imagined AI, robots or technology taking over, they were going to take all the blue-collar jobs, but instead we have ChatGPT and DALL-E that are making incredible art and writing screenplays and scripts and legal contracts. So rather than these blue-collar jobs disappearing and people moving to a white-collar sector, it seems now like they're having a lot more difficulty finding an AI or a robot that can build a car or cook my food or do any of the things like that, and instead they're doing design work and putting graphic designers out of work or writing copy for people.
Yeah, and I think isn't that, you thought we would have really learned during the pandemic how critical those within the service industry that we have used and abused and horridly paid, how much we need them and how critical they are, and yet, like the pandemic, which we're still in, suddenly we've like forgot all the lessons that we've learned during it. Like we've forgotten about the nurses, we've forgotten about our emergency personnel, we've forgotten about those who are making our food, who are making sure that we get the packages, who are delivering our mail. Like we've just forgotten about all those people, and those would all be primed and ready lessons for AI. Like they really have shown us like where do we need to invest and where do we need to make sure that we're getting ahead of things. But we have a Snapchat brain, right? It's like it's there and then it's gone. We have this 10-second loop feed, and then we're on to the next thing. And it's just, again, I think by design, but it's setting us up for some really dangerous things. And especially with Erie, we've not notoriously been known to to be out in front of things.
No, definitely not.
We're playing catch up a lot. And so this makes me very scared for the current structure and the layout that we've had, because we really haven't, or I'm not hearing a lot of the discussion or seeing the investment in the ways that the whole world is moving. And we've I don't want us to forever and always be playing catch up. Like we've got to have some shifting here.
So there's been catch up. I mean, I remember talking to my grandpa years ago, talking about when he was growing up in the 40s and the 50s, like they were playing catch up back then. You know, like they've been playing catch up for 100 years. You know, that's a lot of time. That's a lot of city council people. That's a lot of politicians. That's a lot of different ventures that haven't panned out the way that is necessary to jump ahead of the curve. So, like, how's it going to change this time?
Some of the things that I think are a good beacon of hope, I think the community college is phenomenal because of how easy it is to shift curriculum there, right? And how affordable it is. They can see a job market starting to open and they can literally create that niche and that training. I see more private and public partnership. You can see that with the investment downtown. There's good and bad inside of this, but what you see though is that people are starting to realize, like, we can't wait for people to come rescue. Like, we've got to start doing something here internally. When you get young people on there, though, when you get young people who have grown up using tech, who have grown up in the rapidness of even social media, I think it primes you with a council who can see things differently, or electeds who can see things differently, because my kid's whole life has been on electron. I was still paying per text when I got to college, right? And so I remember when Facebook dropped, I was 17 years old, and I'm age. And so you watch these things, and my kids, when I can't figure out something, I literally hand it to my 10-year-old, and they've just grown up with this. And when we start to get those young and passionate people pulled in, and we're including them in the conversations, and not being like, "Oh, you're just a kid. You don't. What do you know?" They are. I mean, it's literally how we catch up. And when you look around, who is leading and who's sitting at the top of organizations, or who is serving on boards, you start to see it's very homogenous. You start to see that it's kind of the same people serving on the same boards, are kind of moving from this elected seat to this elected seat, and we're not including those young voices who bring all that energy. There is some shifting, like Black Wall Street, Young Erie Professionals. There is movement. But you're not seeing, I think, the community embrace it at the rate that we need to. I'm hoping, with me getting on council, that puts a few of us on there who are younger, and we've grown up in all the rapid shifting. And so with these louder voices getting in there, I think that is what's going to be different this time. School board's already shifting. County council is shifting. And I think it will make a difference. I do think it makes a difference.
Do you have a plan? I was just thinking while you were talking about the young people, I totally agree. I mean, we got Edinburgh, Penn West. We got Gannon. We have Mercyhurst.
We are, baby.
We are Penn State right here, yeah. But, I was thinking specifically Barron, because, we got one of the best engineering schools around. People come here, instead of, State College. How do we is there a plan to keep all of these young, bright minds here? How do we keep these people here?
And just to add on to what you're saying, I feel like at Barron, it's been, at least when we were there, I heard it a lot from different professors about turning Erie into a tech sector or a tech investment on 12th Street. And they have Knowledge Park now, which is mostly empty last time I was up there, and they're trying to bring businesses and trying to draw in businesses. And I feel like that's such a huge opportunity that is not being met with the proper support. Maybe I don't want to say somebody's doing a bad job, but maybe they're just, something is not lining up. And I'm wondering where that disconnect is.
I think people will see the original price tag, right? So let's talk about just the infrastructure around, for example, building fiber network. And they're like, shit, that's a lot of money. We don't have that money. But then you get caught on that and you forget, what would that mean, though, for tech? Or industry to move here. They're not going to move here if they're still on sketchy Wi-Fi that drops when too many people are logged on, that you literally can't build. So if we're not willing to invest in that upfront cost and see that big ticket and and think further out. Kind of going back to what you were saying about, investing in the $20 shoes because it's cheaper right now, right? If we continue to invest in these $20 solutions, we will forever be behind. Mm-hmm. And there's not a single reason or incentive for a young person to stay. They can't afford, the jobs aren't going to pay their student loans. They can't log online in half the places in the county. And where are they going to live if they don't have a job that's, paying them with all this money that they're now shoveling back into student loans, because they can't. So we've not created the infrastructure, not just within the internet, but within housing, within the job market. And I think it's because we keep trying the same solutions and we're not willing to think outside of the box.
I just think and I know it's just a massive, question that isn't an easy answer, but I think of just people that I know, you go to Pittsburgh, you go to Pitt, you're not from Pittsburgh, or you're from Pittsburgh, you go there, and then a lot of people stay there. You go to these big cities, you go to school at NYU or Columbus or Case Western or Cleveland State, and it's not and then you stay there because it's
you fall in love with the city,
or not even that. Well, you fall in love with the city maybe, but there's you have your education and then you walk out the door and there's just so much opportunity right in front of you. You don't have to go anywhere else. And I know we're not quite as big as those cities, but that's just something that's always stuck with me, because we do have a pretty fair amount of universities around here. And I remember when I was in school, it was okay, go to school, graduate, so you have a better chance of getting out of here, mm-hmm. To get yourself a better job. It's not like these other places that are nearby where it's go to school so you can stay here and make more money. It's go to school so you can ship out somewhere where you can actually succeed. And that's that's not the narrative we want here, in Erie, but it's one that I feel has to change for things to be successful in the future. They always say, the kids are the future, right? So if you can't create a space where the kids can grow into something, then it's never going to work, right?
Absolutely. And there's so many points in there that I'm trying to slow my brain down a little bit to try to grab a couple of them. One being when you going back to you walk out the door when you're in Pittsburgh, 9 times out of 10 you don't need a car to get to your next destination. It's either walkable, bikeable, or somehow commutable to get there. So in Erie, if you're working at one of the hospitals, there's a high probability that you also need a car to go get to whatever house that you've got to live at, because we don't have a ton of options right now that are available or affordable downtown. And so when we think about the fights over bike lanes and that people are this is so silly, it's actually not. It's not. Because it all comes back to this. When we think about, how many of our students are in that school to prison pipeline, right? So they're not then able to go on to get the loan money because they got in trouble for truancy or stealing or fighting, but we're not asking why they're truant or stealing or fighting. 9 times out of 10, they're crimes of poverty, meaning they didn't have enough food at the house. They had to stay home to watch their siblings because their parents are having to work so many jobs, or, other things are happening. So we talk about how kids are our future, but we're not really investing in them. And then we're not doing some of the simple things that make people want to stay in a city. When you talk to young people, what are the things that they get excited about? I want to be able to have entertainment. Cool. So let's invest in, the art scene in Erie, is really taking off.
It really is.
It's really
It's
amazing
awesome,
to watch that. And we've got downtown restaurants now that are starting to open up more and welcome in this younger crowd. We've got Radius, these co-working spaces, that help pull these young entrepreneurs together. But we haven't built the infrastructure historically that really. Why would you stay here? Why would you stay here? We haven't shown that we believe in you or that we want you to stay here until more recently. And so I think, kind of going back to what you said, it is complex, but at the same time, we make it so complex that there are some pretty simple solutions to a lot of these things too.
Yeah. And just to go back to what Dave was saying, there's Gideon, about finding, I feel like there's so many instances in Erie and opportunities that somebody just needs to pull the trigger on. Yeah. You know what I mean? Fiber optic, we already have Velocity Net right downtown. I'm like begging and waiting and praying that someday they cover our thing because I would want to support local and I don't want Spectrum. And there's just an abundance of resources here that we're missing out on. There's a population of, just doing the math in my head and imagining the numbers, there's got to be a fluctuation of about 20,000 college students that come in and out of Erie County every year during the school year.
And I think that's a low count, to be honest. I think that's low.
Right. And that it may be a conservative estimate, but what are we doing to keep, like Dave said, if it was Pitt and you went to Pitt, you would want to work in Pitt afterward, or you'd want to work in Pittsburgh afterwards because you went to school there. This is where you know it's your new neighborhood, all your friends, blah blah blah. And why are we not keeping any of these conservatively 20,000 college students in our area that come to school every year to go to school? And then go back for the summer or stay or get an apartment here and then leave and go away to their next job that's in Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Buffalo or, California or wherever it is they go. It just seems like a huge loss to me that we're not retained. Like that should be an instant population builder, Absolutely. I would think in my head.
Absolutely. And I think during the pandemic, we missed a really golden opportunity. And I'm hoping we can catch it, and I'm hoping it's not forever gone. But relatively speaking, our costs of living here are pretty low, and there's still so much remote work that is happening that we really had this opportunity to really attract a lot of young families and people who are just starting up their business to be based here. But because we don't have the just fundamental necessities to run or work from home, I don't want to keep harping on the internet, but that's like the one thing that, or we don't.
They are working on that, aren't they?
They absolutely are, right? And there's a lot of things in play right now with county, but really with city council, and they've pulled some really great initiatives forward. And I know VNet has like quadrupled the area that they want to cover, and they're doing it in a very much more rapid than they had originally projected, which I think is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I love to see it. But we haven't really invested in that infrastructure for people to be able to live here and work here. We still have giant food deserts all around this, even in the city. And so when we have people who have to come here, buy a house, rent a house, and also get a car, we just make it exponentially more difficult. Yeah,
and the interesting part is that a lot of these houses are you mentioned that our housing is relatively affordable. A lot of the super affordable, cool old houses that you see downtown are right in the middle of. There's no resources nearby. You know what I mean? It's not that would be something that I would look forward to, and it's something that I think about a lot when we travel anymore. Is am I going to need to rent a car in this city? Am I going to be able to ride the bus or the train or the subway system? And ones that I can ride the subway on become very attractive to me because that's however much money I'm saving on this trip that can go towards the trip rather than paying for a rental car because I need to drive to all these places rather than using public transit.
Absolutely. And you think about the other things that make people really excited to go, trying new food, just exploring kind of the culture of that city. With some of the development that's happened, we've kind of pushed out some of that culture from downtown or the ease of accessibility. And they've had to move some of the restaurants or some of the grocery marts a little bit farther, making it, again, even harder for those who are now living downtown. It's requiring you to have a certain amount of privilege and advantage, and hence the word gentrification, though I get a lot of pushback for saying that's what's happening. The average person can't afford to go into the downtown co-op as their main source of groceries, right? They just can't.
And I love the co-op, and I think they're amazing, but every time I try to go there, I always end up making another trip to another grocery store, which is annoying.
Yeah, it's just not feasible for a family to have that be your main source, right? And I do love the co-op and everything that they stand for.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just that the population that we currently have with the job market we currently have, it's just not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of how to word this because I want to say it correctly, and it's a legitimate question that I have. I'm just curious, when you're raising the desirability of an area, you got Erie Insurance, you got all the new buildings down there, you got Hammett, you got a bunch of, cool, the Radius Co-works down there, you got a bunch of very good stuff going on. Is it possible to grow an area like that without everything just exponentially going up in cost.
Absolutely. So in a lot of other cities, as they're doing this investment, they will have part of contracts like you have to have so much of the footprint of what you're buying has to be, a green space or open to the public, or you have to do this much investment into affordable housing or keeping this much of your building within a certain price range. And I think that might frustrate, but I think that's also how you navigate, right? Everybody can win in these situations, right? The more vibrant our downtown is, it's the only time I'll ever use the ripple effect and we'll actually believe it, right? When you have a vibrant downtown that pulls people, the local businesses benefit, a lot of people benefit from that, but you've also got to take into consideration when we say yes to one thing, we are saying no to something else. So if we are saying yes to giant private investors or these people, it means we're saying no, or we're taking, at least this space away from this other group of people. And how can we match and do and invest consciously that is allowing all of us to exist in spaces together? And it is absolutely working in bigger cities where it's part of the building is that you have to also invest some of that, in other ways that's accessible to other people.
Right. So would it be like, for instance, you build up the downtown and that's the central focus, and you get more, let's say, like money coming in from taxes, or, more money coming into the city. So you're able to take those extra resources and like help people on the east side of town.
Yes.
So because, that's like the lowest income part of the city. So like you take what you got there and you help out the people out to the east side, and then
making sure that like if we're investing this much for if it's coming through public dollars, if we're setting aside this much, how much are we setting aside over here for the areas that we've historically not invested in? And we just need to be more equitable in how we're going to distribute that. When we look at things like LRTA or these tax incentives that we're using, there's more talk around the CRIZ. Who is going to benefit and who's going to be harmed? Because there's always somebody that's going to be harmed. You can't have one group benefit and not have another group not be harmed. That's just not how it works, right? Because when you give to one, you can't give to the other. But you can look at things consciously and plan in a way that is way more equitable and includes versus excludes or gentrifies or pushes out, right? And as we build, you're going to make the cost of living because you're going to raise the value of property in certain areas. So how do we make sure that the people who can no longer afford to live in these areas can either stay in there? Like, what are we doing to protect the cost of their house? Or if they want to invest, or how are we making sure that they can stay there? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Right. There's a lot of really creative ways to incentivize through tax dollars to get businesses that are building houses or a subdivision or, apartment buildings or whatever, to do a certain number of affordable housing for X tax break or X number of dollars that you contribute towards this project.
Absolutely. And I think that's where I start to get angry is there is this belief in this belief in the trickle down system, and it just it's never worked. It's never
Ronald Reagan. God damn it, he's a frequent
we
antagonist of this podcast,
and I hate it.
Not a fan.
And when we look at things like LRTA, or we look at these buildings and we're giving out tax breaks. And when we have so many nonprofits, myself, I have one, but I'm housed in a for-profit building, so that for-profit is still paying taxes, right? But how do we not give up or give away so much money without ensuring other people are being taken care of? So if we're going to give out tax incentive, how do we use those incentives to, like what you just said, to make sure other people are still being taken care of? Because essentially, when the richest don't pay through development or whatever, it hits those who are already struggling the hardest. It hits them the most. And though they'll say, LRTA is available to everybody, the average homeowner, especially right now, doesn't have just $10,000 to go invest to have that tax break on. They just don't have that in their savings. Like, they're living paycheck to paycheck. So how do we do this in a way that is ensuring those who are getting $1 million tax breaks are still taking care of the people who are living paycheck to paycheck?
It's a very careful balance.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned your nonprofit. We're starting to run low on time, so I'm glad that you brought that up. Tell us a little bit about Compton's Table.
So Compton's Table is something that was kind of born out of my doctorate program. When getting my doctorate degree, we had to focus on one of the wicked problems of the world, and I focused on healthy development for all youth, and specifically the suicide rates of gender expansive and queer people between the ages of 10 to 24. And as the numbers were almost exactly the same as they were when I was in high school, it just made me sick to my stomach. I was like, I have to do something. And I looked at what was happening in our region, and there wasn't anything that was just focused on reducing suicidality amongst queer youth. And that's kind of where Compton's Table was born. It really is designed to reduce suicide, reduce self-harm, and increase hope through social engagement and activism and creating safer spaces. So we want the youth to come and the young adults to come and just get to be social together, while those of us who are on the board are out doing trainings and advocacy and fighting on that end, right? So that they get to just be youth and young adults and do the thing that youth and young adults do in a safe space, while we're out making the rest of the community safe for them.
I feel like Erie's desperately needed an outreach point like this for a long time, because prior to Compton's Table, it's always been the Zone.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that there can be a hub now that's not a bar. And I'm sorry, Zone, I love you. You're great. You're fantastic. All the things that you do are wonderful and amazing. But it's really good to have like a hub that's a nonprofit and available to everybody.
Yeah, and we're getting our own like recording equipment, so it's going to be a space for youth to kind of come in and young adults to come in. We have people do open mic, so they're making like their own. I always say albums. It's not, because that's not what people really do. But they come in and they can record and they can use the editing software and have it done in a space where they're not being judged for what they're playing or what they're wearing or how they're showing up, or they're making podcasts, or they're making their YouTube videos, or they're coming in for board night or board game night, or our art shows where they can just kind of come in to express, and it's been really amazing to just watch these youth come in and just be who they are and just have fun and not be worried that someone's judging them or that they're not going to be safe in the space.
Absolutely. Well, it's amazing, and I feel like we could continue this conversation for so much longer, but we do need to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming on today.
This was great. This was great. So thank you.
Yeah, we had a good time chatting with you. Very interesting conversation. Hope you guys all learned something out there. Vote for Tyler in the next election, because he's already won this one.
Yes, I love that. I would love all the votes. Thank you.
Check him out on social media. Check us out on social media. Like, follow, share, do all those things. Support us on Patreon if you really love us.